Hello and welcome to the hard sell, where the stick in the swill-bucket rattles back, and where against all common sense I've decided to inaugurate yet another new sub-serious type thing whatever. You see, my interest in advertising came from a childhood surrounded by the stuff, which we also called the 1980s. And it wasn't just on television, or even primarily on television really. There were only two commercial stations, one of which I was afraid of, and which couldn't always afford adverts in my bumfuck rural area anyway. We never had a satellite or nothing. Probably the majority of advertising I saw was outside on billboards or inside in magazines. I could read from a very young age, was pretty much instantly addicted, and most of my childhood was spent finding things with words and images in just for the sake of absorbing them. Adverts were perfect for the very small me, because they're very deliberately created to be simple and direct enough to be comprehended by a 2-year-old. I mean, if advertisers could hit you on the head and point, they do that. So, I flipped through magazines, looking at the adverts. Mainly the Radio and TV Times, of course, because those were always at hand. But also Family Circle, the bourgeois how-to guide my mother used to read on a monthly basis, and similar publications like Living, as well as early computer magazines. The disreputable gaming ones, the sleek productivity-based ones, and the terrifying phone book-sized hardware-conscious ones for serious spots. This is where my whole advertising thing really started, before we even had a VCR, when print was still king, certainly as far as repeatable experiences were concerned. Never mind the autobiography, though. The point is I wanted to inaugurate a whole new series of videos where I'd find one of those old magazines and go through them now as an adult with a greater understanding and all that bollocks. Unfortunately, I don't have any of those old magazines anymore. Family Circles went decades ago. Listings magazines are never intended to outlive the week they cover in the first place. I did used to have a copy of the 1993 issue covering the 30th anniversary of Doctor Who, but that's the genesis of another obsession. Plenty of people have put up scans of old magazines on the internet, though. Mostly on the Internet Archive, archive.org, and largely for nostalgic purposes, I expect. It's mostly those aforementioned computer ones, and I'm sure I'll get round to covering one of those one day, but not just yet. Orchid Soundwaves, Gravis Blackhawks, and American Megatrends feel like the sort of thing to work up to, not to start a whole new strand with. Strand, that's the word. And even if they're not computery, the magazines on archive.org tend to be American, which is a bit of a shame as well. I really wanted to start with the late 80s housewifely family circles of my youth, which as I recall were full of white goods, low-fat spreads, and knowing smile ads for creams and objects that I had no comprehension of whatsoever. The family circle will have to remain a mystery for now, however. Instead, I've gone for the next best thing, a listings magazine, albeit an American one. So let's take a quick hop over the Atlantic and back over 40 years to an issue of TV Guide from June 1980, for the very first and potentially the last edition of Happiness in Magazine. Stephanie Powers and Robert Barg doing Heart to Heart on the cover, as drawn by Richard Ansell. Very classy. A lot of the adverts in here are inevitably for forthcoming TV shows and the like, but I'm going to skip those because there's a danger it'll turn into a history of American television instead. And this is a programme about adverts, damn it. In that respect, TV Guide in 1980 seems to have operated along similar lines to the Radio Times at the same time. That is to say, a first half full of articles and columns in full colour, including the advertising, and then the listing page themselves in utilitarian black and white newsprint squinto vision, interspersed with even more adverts, also in monochrome. For what it's worth, the Radio Times ceased running adverts in amongst the listings page in 1994 or so. Starting with the inside cover, because I'm conventional like that. Well, what do you know? Cigarettes. Spoiler warning, the vast majority of ads in this magazine are for cigarettes. We still had tobacco advertising in this country at the time, of course, but by 1980 it was increasingly compromised, to the point of using abstract iconography so as to avoid the rules over what could and couldn't be said by simply saying nothing, at least using actual language. Well, America never had that problem, because freedom and so forth. apart from having a little box saying, "Oh, by the way, Julius Richmond says it'll kill you." Tobacco products could just nonchalantly advertise themselves like just about anything else. This one describes its carcinogenic leaves using more or less the same language as you see in a coffee advert. Choice, rich, sun-rich blend, whatever that means, if anything. Full and satisfied. The only missing word is aroma. I suppose there is obvious reasons for that. Here in specific we have Winston, which, as you'll recall, tastes good like a cigarette should, apparently attempting to siphon off some of Marlboro's constituents by blatantly copying their rugged, manly, outdoorsy image. The difference being that this guy's not a cowboy, he's a lumberjack, and he's okay. Something transvesticism. For an American advert, this looks incredibly Canadian. A couple of pages later, Holiday Inn has a dividend scheme that will make your savings double. Hold on, so that's double, quadruple, octuple, sextuple, duotriquintuple. It will make your savings duotriquintuple, assuming you do nothing but stay in Holiday Inns for the rest of your life. That's the thing with these sorts of dividends and loyalty cards. They claim to reward loyalty, but they actually enforce it. They give you all these savings, but it's not like you can use them anywhere else. As for the ad, I think it's a bit of a waste putting it in the colour section, since it only has one colour, and really no actual images. Overleaf, more cigarettes. Quite a contrast there. These are Virginia Slim's Lights. Lady-type fags with lady-type fonts, sophisticated sans serif for the name, and swooshy Frenchy script for the qualifier. And instead of a manly lumberjack standing amidst the giant redwood, the larch, the fir, and the mighty Scots pine, you have a 1980 standard beauty, hardcore rouge, big hair, and for some reason a dressing gown with lips drawn all over it, posing coquettishly in a white void. And if you weren't 100% clear on the intended market just from that, the copy actively states it aloud. Men have over 30 brands of low-tar cigarettes. You have Virginia Slim Lights. These are unambiguously for girls, apparently the only cigarettes for girls. God help you if you smoke anything else. Which means that just as unambiguously, all the other brands are for penis havers. The practical difference between Virginia Slim Lights and any other low-tar cigarette, and we're going to see a lot more of them later on, is obviously highly questionable. Oh, except for the crush-proof purse pack. This advert's positioning in the magazine is of interest as well. It comes right before a 3-page article profiling the late Eddie Mecca from Laverne and Shirley. Okay, it's hardly the sex symbol of 1980, but I'd say at least in this picture, he's better looking than John Travolta, who was. The Magnum PI didn't start until December. It's the Carter era, you take what you can get. The intended audience for the article is further reinforced by the adverts it's wrapped in. Lady pads on one side, and on the other, no more bets. 1980 is still relatively bold to advertise these things at all, especially with such matter-of-factly explicit copy. As soon as it's in place, Rely billows out to fit virtually wall to wall, complete with illustrative example, and talk of bypass accidents and staining. It even uses the word period, which British equivalents continue to shy away from for years.
Sometimes I get those headachy pains, that strange, washed-out feeling that you just can't explain.
She's talking about period pains.
It's almost like menstruation is a perfectly natural process, and not the terrifying visceral moon ritual that all men secretly suspect it is. Against this, the colour scheme is very carefully set to the usual crispy blues and whites that dominated Lady Things commercials for years, at least in the ad itself. Not much I could do about the green and brown logo. Directly behind it, well, that's an image. These are the things I could do without. Still, let's face it, aimed at female readers, because it's 1980. Shout is an interesting name for a detergent, though. Not as obvious as Vanish, but certainly powerful. This one heralds an article about W. Somerset Maugham, because there's a TV movie adaptation of one of his stories on in the week. Apparently that's a more masculine subject. As we're back in testosterone world a couple of pages later. I said testosterone, I didn't say alpha males. Yes, it's a far cry from the chiselled, square-jawed metrosexuals of today's Gillette adverts. Mr. Muscle, someone's dad, and Joe Don Baker, inexplicably upset about the fact that he's succeeding in his business. Hire a better stockkeeper, dumbass. Directly behind that, more cigarettes. Almost aggressively straightforward this time. Just a massive picture of a packet of fags with some giant letters saying they're great, and some slightly smaller letters warning that they give you cancer. Low tar is the thing. This is one of those 30-odd light brands for men that the Virginia Slims ad mentioned. Light, low tar, extra filtered, whatever term you use, it was the main selling point for tobacco products in those days, ever since the cancelling was definitively proven in the late 50s. Necessitating some sort of diet version for PR purposes. The light cigarette really took off in the 70s. By 1980, the industry's gone crazy for them, as we will continue to see. Needless to say, they are no better for you. That basically ends the first third of the magazine. No more colour for a bit as we move along to the listings pages themselves. Though if you shift to monochrome, we also seem to shift to slightly smaller time products, the sort that are making a saving by not being in colour. Also, as it's the summer, there's a lot of home and garden stuff, which I also remember being true in the Radio Times when they still had adverts amidst the listings. There's bug spray, and cool time pool times, and a cool knife. Back when you could just mail order a hunting knife. I mean, you still can. I know I said I wasn't going to include the TV shows, but this one's interesting because I almost broke my brain trying to figure it out. Been training for 4 years, and now this is their moment. The 1980 US Olympic trials in boxing. Fair enough in theory, but then I remembered, this is 1980. America didn't fucking go to the Olympics. What the fuck? And this is June the 21st. The boycott was announced in January. What the hell are they doing here? But apparently, even though they refused to set foot in Commie-land, or rather their government forbade them from setting foot in Commie-land, the United States held their athletics, swimming and indeed boxing trials for the Olympics nonetheless, even though they were now completely meaningless. In fact, the swimming trials took place a week after the closing ceremony. So tune in to your local NBC affiliate at 8 p.m. in whatever time zone we're in, to watch several demoralised amateur boxers punch each other to no purpose whatsoever. They'll teach Brezhnev to invade Afghanistan. After the listings, there's another handful of colour pages and more adverts for cigarettes. Low damn tar cigarettes. The lowest, in fact. So damn low, it's practically zero, supposedly. A breakthrough. Notice that the phrase closest to tar-free is in unattributed quotes, and followed by a trademark symbol. That's your hint that it's a completely manufactured statement with no obligation whatsoever to reality. Particularly the trademark symbol. That might as well be an asterisk reading, "We are making this up." Apparently you can still get Now brand cigarettes, despite it being an almost totally forgettable name. Meanwhile, here's a pen. A gleaming silver pen. With a jagged brushed chrome logo. This biro is serious business. This is probably the pen that Kenny Loggins uses. Pen! This one interrupts a puff piece about how fabulous Stephanie Powers is, which includes an endearing bit of unsolicited feminism from Lionel Stander, which I've reproduced here just for the hell of it. He was a good guy. And opportunistically, on the page immediately afterwards, is a downright troubling advert for Weight Watchers, which claims to be eliminating guilt. But I'm not sure its passive-aggressive tone is an improvement. Then there's a serious piece about the troubles of broadcasting during an election year, swinging the audience meter back to middle-aged male intellectuals, which means, oh look, more cigarettes. Menthols this time. Another strategy the industry came up with to make up for the fact that their product is literally lethal. We're back in the outdoors, and even quite possibly back in the same woody part of Colorado they shot the Winston one in. But this time our smoking hero is a clean-cut middle-ager in tweeds and wool beret, clutching some driftwood in one hand and a whisper-thin lady type in the other, like a cross between Alan Delon and Jeremiah Johnson. These ones are being marketed as light, but not too light, signifying that Lotars have been around long enough for a backlash of sorts to have built up. But not too much, because as the back cover demonstrates, the arms race continues. Even though Now brand has already claimed to be the lowest tar cigarettes available, Carlton clearly beg to differ, and they have a table to prove it. You can do this sort of thing in America, of course, and name names while you're doing it, which remains the case up to the present day, as far as I understand. Although, notably, Now brand aren't listed in the table. And why is that, eh? Eh? Whatever, they'll kill you just as efficiently. So that's a TV guide from 1980. The tail end of the Carter era and malaise. The start of a new phase in the Cold War. At a time when everyone in America was smoking low-tar cigarettes, apparently. Now, it's down to you. Yes, you. With the face. I'd quite like this to be a semi-regular thing, like Have a Break and Pavlov's Bell, and to a lesser extent Not Brand X. However, that depends on the material. As I said, the Internet Archive has lots of magazines, but not that much variety. It's almost all computer magazines, frankly. Ideally, what I want is some scans of Family Circles and Radio Timeses from the 80s, the stuff I grew up on. And I particularly like that 30th anniversary of Doctor Who Radio Times back as well, actually. If you can help, contact us via the form on bobthefish.org.uk, and who knows, you might get your name mumbled incomprehensibly in some future episode of this bollocks. Hooray! You just sat through a Bob the Fish production. Nice! If you haven't already, you absolutely must check out bobthefish.org.uk. Literally hundreds more videos not unlike that one, adding up to days worth of entertainment and all absolutely free. But if you're not a cold-hearted skinflint, you can always support us on Patreon. For as little as anything at all, you can make programs like the one you just watched possible in the first place, and become eligible for bonus material such as glimpses of the book I'm writing about the BBC, monthly riffings on random commercial breaks, the complete archives of the angry political satire magazine Two Sons, and even the odd very occasional bonus video essay unavailable anywhere else. If nothing else, you should prevent me from starving and or freezing to death in the foreseeable future, so that'll be nice. No pressure or anything. bobthefish.org.uk. You make it what it is.